Okay, let's try that again. Now that I've eaten an entire cookie without audio. No. Okay, yeah, I do have a microphone. Y'all can hear me, yeah? All right, let's go. And you can see me. I am moving. A computer cookie is more formally known as an HTTP cookie, a web cookie, an internet cookie, or a browser cookie. So one of the things that's going to help us kind of understand cookies is to understand where they're coming from. As we saw in our video, these kind of emerged in the mid 90s whenever like e-commerce was just starting up. And one thing you have to understand is that in the 90s, computers sucked, man. They sucked. I don't know what to tell you. Like, you know, my first computer, it had a 6 gigabyte hard drive, probably spun at like 4,800 RPMs, which is just no comparison to what we got today. The first bit of RAM, I believe, I probably had like 256 kilobytes of RAM, maybe half a gig. Neil's in chat. Miss Vu's in chat. They can maybe give us some insight to what their first computers were like. Case in point, space was really limited. A lot of computer decisions, right? The whole idea behind Java having these 8 primitive data types and those data types being really small and there being so many of them, despite the fact there's so many similarities, it all deals with space. Space was very, very, very limited in the mid 90s. That's where cookies come about, right? We're having issues with servers at the time, basically trying to keep track of things like shopping carts, server side, right? Keep in mind, last week when we were talking about the internet, HTTP, etc., I introduced you this idea of client side and server side. There is bits of code that are executing client side, that is on your local machine, and there's bits of code that are happening server side. Sweet little layup there. Um, so server side, they were running out of space by trying to store this data pertaining to something like your shopping cart on their server. So the guy came up with this idea is like, well, what if we tried to store it on their local machine? Okay. So a cookie is just information. When we talk about this, a lot of it is kind of weird because it's more, a cookie is not a formal thing. It's just a concept almost more than anything else. It's just information. It's information that gets stored on your local machine. When you visit a website that uses cookies, data is stored on your computer. Emphasis here on your computer. Okay, so it's local. It is local to your machine. It is local to the browser that you're using, right? So if you visit a website using Google Chrome that uses cookies, a cookie gets created through Google Chrome. It's stored in Chrome on your local machine. But if you go back to that exact same website and say Firefox or a different web browser, it's going to create a different cookie. Right? It may not recognize you. It may ask you to log back in, that sort of thing. The purpose is to help track your visits and activity, and that's not always a bad thing. Many online retailers, for example, use cookies to keep track of items in their user's shopping cart as they explore the site. Okay? This is really why it emerged. Shopping cart is just like the go-to example of this. Whenever I am on a website and I am throwing things into my cart, the website needs a way to kind of keep track of the things that are in the cart, particularly like if I close the browser and then come back maybe, those things are still there. That's evidence of cookies. A website might also use cookies to keep a record of your most recent visit or to record your login information. So we're using cookies less and less for the shopping cart side of it. I'll give you kind of an example. If you were to go on Amazon on your computer and put some things in your shopping cart, and then you pick up your cell phone and you go to Amazon, those things are in your shopping cart, right? Despite everything I just said about cookies being local. And this is where some of the confusion comes in because that's not really a cookie at that point. Initially, this stuff came about because we needed space. The servers needed space. And so they started storing stuff on your local machines. But as time has gone on, space is more readily abundant. So a big time retailer like Amazon, they don't have to use cookies. They still do use cookies for various other reasons, but the shopping cart has kind of moved away from that. Servers, places like Amazon, they don't need to put they don't need to use cookies for your shopping cart anymore. They can actually store that server side because they have plenty of space. And so that is not quite a cookie because it's actually not stored on your local machine. Okay. One of the ways that we tend to use cookies now, like that's still kind of left intact, is kind of keeping your login information. So when you visit a website, you log in, it's successful. The website's like, hey, I'm going to remember your computer next time, so maybe you don't have to do that, right? So it's a convenience to you. Under normal circumstances, cookies cannot transfer viruses or malware to your computer. We're going to talk more about viruses and malware when we get to cybersecurity, but I figured I'd touch on it here because cookies kind of have a bad reputation these days. I don't really think it's justified, but they can't transfer viruses or malware, bad things, to your computer. However, some viruses or malware may be disguised as cookies. For instance, these things called super cookies. This is news to me. This is information coming from Norton's website. Super cookies can be a potential security concern, and many browsers offer a way to block them. There's also a zombie cookie. That is a cookie that recreates itself after being deleted, making like several copies, right? That kind of acts as a virus. I'm going to show you in just a moment how to maybe delete or remove cookies. Maybe you don't trust cookies, and so you want to get rid of that stuff. Well, one problem you could incur is if you go to delete a cookie and it's actually programmed to recreate itself, maybe makes additional copies. And then lastly, third-party tracking. This is probably the most important and the one that you actually maybe should be leery about. Third-party tracking cookies can also cause security and privacy concerns since they make it easier for parties you can't identify to watch where you're going and what you're doing online. As we just saw in our video, it's possible for a website like Facebook, right? Maybe you're using a website that has the potential for a Facebook login. Well, if Facebook is using cookies, that data actually tracks over multiple websites. A lot of this happens all the time with, especially if they're like joint websites, they're dual owned, something like Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, right? If you go to Instagram and you look up something in their search, maybe that gets logged as a cookie. And so whenever you go to Facebook's website, ads related to that search start showing up. And you're like, wait a minute, I wasn't even on Facebook looking for that. I was on Instagram looking for that. That's kind of what we're talking about here, is that there is some tracking information. And you got to keep in mind, what the main thing they're trying to do is just target advertisements. There's a whole discussion here about how targeted advertisements, just maybe that's a good thing, right? Don't you want to see ads related to things that you're interested in, as in maybe like, diapers? I'm not trying to buy diapers right now, but maybe I'm trying to buy a graphics card. I was, not anymore, but maybe I'm trying to buy a graphics card. And so I'm looking on various websites, and some of that data trickles over to a different website, and I start seeing targeted ads for things that I'm interested in. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. Some people would say that they kind of like that. At the same time, man, that feels like an invasion of my privacy, right? For some other website to kind of know that I was doing some search somewhere else. So this is kind of where people have a problem with it. So if you do have a problem with cookies, I'm going to show you how in the Google Chrome to manage your cookies, including deleting them, etc. So I'm going to bring up a Chrome browser. As we talked about when we were talking about web browsers, Chrome is the most popular web browser, even still. Okay, so I'm going to rock this guy over as a guest. And so I'm in Chrome. Let me make sure this is showing up on stream. Yeah. Let's say I'm interested in editing cookie stuff. Up here we have our settings. I'm going to go to settings. I may not do it under this guest. All right, okay, we'll do it as me. So I'm in my settings here. And what we're looking for is privacy and security. Okay, under here, there is browsing data. So I'm going to click on that, clear browsing data. Notice that cookies is part of that. And so one of the checkboxes that you're probably interested in here is just the cookies one. There's other stuff, browsing history, download history, passwords, that sort of thing, right? So maybe you just want to clear cookies. This is just a one-time, get rid of everything that's already on the browser, the cookies that are currently in existence. What this is probably going to do is that websites that use cookies, if you go back to them, they're going to perform a check and see, do you have the cookie there? If you don't, they're going to ask you all over again. Something else you can do is kind of control, right? So under our site settings, so privacy and security, there is site settings, control what information websites can use and what content they can show you. Very first thing here, cookies and site data. So what I just did was delete the cookies, the ones that are in existence now. Those bits of information that I've told websites it's okay to put on my computer, I just went through and cleared it all out. Now, what I'm showing you now is permissions. So in the future, if I go to a website, maybe I don't want to see stuff about cookies ever again. I just don't want any cookies. Keep in mind, I don't necessarily think that there's a problem with cookies, right? Even Google say we kind of recommend that you leave these on. But what I am saying is if you do have a privacy concern, and this is something you want to turn off, you can do so, right? We can just block all cookies and you never have to worry about them again or deleting them again. Sweet. That's all I got, guys. Just a quick little thing about cookies. In the slides here, which you can find on Canvas, which is running a little bit sluggish today, there are the steps how to kind of go through that with Google Chrome. If you use a different browser, I recommend going in and finding out how to do it there. Weird question. Is clear cache and clear cookies data the same thing? Not necessarily. So part of cache is caching a website. So for instance, whenever you go to a website, we kind of talked about how it loads data. Okay? What a cache does is that whenever you go to a website, it loads the data the first time and then kind of saves a copy on your local machine. Now, when you go back to visit that website, if nothing has changed on the website itself, instead of trying to pull an update, what it does is it just uses the local copy that you have. Now, that's actually true for like a lot of websites. You know, for the most part, a lot of them don't change except maybe like some type of image or like article link, that sort of thing. So what caching does is it basically saves a copy of the website. And then whenever you go to visit that website again in the future, it checks to see, do I need to get the updated version or is this pretty much the exact same from when the person was last here? If it's the exact same, it can pull it from cache. So they are similar. I do like this question. But cache and cookies are not necessarily the same thing. All right, if that's it, we're going to wrap it up, guys. That's been Cookies. Let's chill.